Bienvenidos. El siguiente panel se llama Innovaciones contra la violencia de género. Y sus participantes son Alejandra Padilla. Ella es la cofundadora de Tu Historia Importa en México. Nageli Sánchez Macías, coordinadora de Spotlight en la oficina de ONU Mujeres en México. Amílcar Romero, fundador de Ancagua Global Group del Perú. Michelle Dayan, abogada y presidenta de Lawyers for Women en Francia, y ellas serán moderados por Estefanía Vela. Es la directora general, como saben, de Intersecta en México. Intersecta es una organización feminista que se dedica a la investigación y promoción de políticas públicas para la igualdad. Muchas gracias a todas ustedes por su participación. Las dejo en lo que sería será el último panel del primer día del primer Foro Internacional de la Innovación en la Justicia. Gracias.
Buenas tardes, bienvenidos y bienvenidas al primer Foro Internacional La Innovación en la Justicia. Estamos por comenzar un panel dedicado a innovaciones contra la violencia de género. Soy Estefanía Vela y tengo el honor de moderar este panel, encabezado por 4 personas con trayectorias impresionantes. Me permito brevemente presentarlas. La primera de ellas es Alejandra Padilla, cofundadora de Tu Historia Importa, que nos acompaña desde México. En segundo lugar está Nageli Sánchez Macías, coordinadora de Spotlight de ONU Mujeres México. En tercer lugar nos acompaña Amílcar Romero, fundador de Ancagua Global Group desde Perú. Y por último nos acompaña Michelle Dayan, abogada y presidenta de Lawyers for Women desde Francia. Como mencioné, el panel el día de hoy está enfocado en innovaciones relacionadas con la justicia y la violencia de género. De hecho, esta semana, el miércoles, se conmemora el 25 de noviembre, que es el Día Internacional para la Eliminación de la Violencia contra las Mujeres. Sabemos que en México, pero en muchos otros países, el problema de la violencia de género contra las mujeres es uno que amerita no solo una atención urgente, sino yo diría, sobre todo, innovar precisamente.
Innovation in and of itself, and the ways in which this problem has to be understood, the ways in which this problem has to be tackled, and the ways in which this problem has to be prevented. And this includes, of course, how this all translates in the environment of justice. There are 3 great questions that have been brought to the table to the panelists today, and I'm going to ask them directly so that you know where we're going to with these discussions. So first off, why is innovation in justice so important to combat gender violence? The second one, this is focused specifically on the work that the panelists do. What aspects do you consider to be important for your project in decreasing gender violence? Because the panel today wants to present projects that actually aim at doing this type of innovation. And within the project, if you would like to describe 3 key aspects that from your perspective have promoted this innovation in particular. I'm going to add a bit more as to the people who are working with us right now. We have Alejandra Padilla. She came out of the UNAM University in administration and teacher in general from the London School of Economics and Political Science. She has worked in the government and civil organization societies in topics related to access to justice, gender violence, public policies, and work inequality. She is a co-founder of Recreac, building strategies for equality, a consultant company that provides consultancy efforts for inclusion and equality of work. She collaborates with 2 other colleagues in the creation of the YSM platform that aims at providing information to women victims of of gender violence and sexual violence. We will have Nageli Sanchez Macias. She is a teacher and a professor in cooperation by the Institute of Research Jose Maris Mora. She has a degree in mechanisms for ruling for women. She has worked for civil society, and over the past 10 years, she works in the United Nations in Mexico, where she has coordinated relevant programs in gender, access to human rights for women at the United States Development Program and the prevention of crime in Mexico. She's currently the coordinator of a Spotlight for Women, and a joint initiative between the United Nations and the European Union, the association with the Mexican government, an initiative that is focused in the prevention and elimination of feminicide. And in third place, we have Milka Romero, founder, president of Ankawa International, which is part of the Ankawa Global Group. Ankawa International has developed an algorithm that allows the prevention with a probability of 80% the occurrence of violence against women, facilitating then the development of public policies against said problem. And at last but not least, Michelle Diane, lawyer and president of Lawyers for Women in France. She's a specialist in family law. She came out of the Lawyers School of Paris. She has participated in several colloquia, including those for women in France, Bulgaria, Spain, and Mexico. She is co-founder and president of the Women's Bar Association, which was born from the society's needs and also strengthening international cooperation in combating any form of violence against women, and also in improving the current systems in France and their implementation. As you can see, we have four people that have a long trajectory, both in gender violence and the intersectionality of access for justice. So, without further ado, I give the floor to Alejandra so that she can tell us about the importance of specifically talking about gender violence, and in second place, a project that she has developed in order to tackle this problem. One last clarification for those of you who have joined us, there will be a first round with about 8 minutes of interventions per panelist, and then we will have a second round of about 3 minutes of interventions per panelists, and at the end we will have a round in which they will reply to the questions that you will send to us through the several media. So without further ado, I give you the floor. Thank you, Mexico Valua and Stefania. It is an honor to join you in this panel with colleagues with whom I have shared other spaces, and colleagues with whom I'm sure we will create strategic alliances. I would like to begin by presenting the project I am working with right now alongside several colleagues, and by telling you that we're trying to achieve use of technology as a strategy for innovation. Now I'm going to delve deeper as to why I consider that technology can be key in in certain cases, specific cases of violence. The past week, we launched at a global level the YSM platform. Your Story Matters. You can find that at the ysmysm.com, ysm and it is a platform that aims at providing information to victims and survivors of sexual violence. It is focused specifically on women, but it will also have tools and specific information for men as well. And it is a platform that aims at being global. It is constantly being built on, and it aims at providing information that would be useful to victims and survivors to understand what happened to them. And this is very relevant because the way in which sexuality is brought upon in society, and because sexual violence is usually surrounded by these feelings of shame and guilt, it is important to us to show information to understand what actually happened, information that is key, that covers any type of sexual violence, all the way from rape, being stalked in public and educational spaces, and many others. We aim at providing information as to where to go, not only in thinking of state organizations, but organizations and collective groups and networks. And registering, also bringing a register of what happened, because sometimes we know that the survivors and victims of sexual violence due to this situation and PTSD, there is a short-term and long-term memory loss. And sometimes it's important to register what happened, both for a psychological standpoint and from an emotional standpoint, also from a legal standpoint, should the victim pursue that, and also provide useful information in terms of psychology and emotions. And the innovative part of this platform, and the reason why it aims at being a global platform, is that it is an open source project that invites every single person from everywhere in the world to generate content that is specific to every country. Currently, the platform contains information from the United Kingdom, is being piloted in India, and from Mexico, a group of collaborators and myself are working in the translation and adaptation of the context for Mexico. But it is a platform that allows for this adaptation. And something that is key is that the information being given there is from victims to victims, which we believe is very innovative. And it also aims at finding information, collecting information in just one place that is usually dispersed in the internet. It's not like we are discovering the wheel here, but because if you looked for information in Google, you would find it all disseminated. And what we want is to collect the information in a single source for people who want to browse it. In the case of Mexico, my colleagues and I are focusing and creating two specific tools that are key for Mexico. One of them is it is a route map for institutional attention. That is, from what happens if I go to a hospital, what happens if I go to a prosecutor's office, if I go to a center for women, or if I go to the police, and what happens currently in many countries, and in Mexico we know that it happens too, is that justice is a black box. So we have the institutions saying, well, you have to make your complaint, and nobody tells you that making a complaint is the first step of entering a labyrinth, because it has a very long process, and the victims of sexual violence and other crimes are usually face this very daunting task of entering the system, and they learn as they go and they become experts. But I would like to have this knowledge being shared with other women as well, so that they don't have to go through the first time every single time this happens. So this is where we're creating this sort of a route map that needs to have a very honest information, because we know what should happen, what the state should do. We know that what the state should provide, but we also know that it is failing, and we want to make a contrast between what should be and what actually happened with experience from our victims. And we're also creating a network of survivors and victims to question what we understand as justice. This is what brought us into this proposal by YSM Global, which is being developed by an organization in UK, which is called Chain, which means that we have to develop justice in the way we understand it. In order to create these processes, we need to bolster them, but we also need to rethink justice for their victims, because sometimes the state is no longer finding answers. You have to rethink justice, rethink reparations, and open up dialogue for everybody. I believe that my time is about to end, but I just wanted to close by saying that the platform, I still have 3 minutes. Okay, the platform, because I have 3 minutes, I'm going to delve deeper into rethinking justice. We know that this is a proposal that focuses on attention, but we have something very clear. Now that we have organizations that are working on strengthening institutions and improving the capabilities of due diligence for every prosecutor's office, we also think that people that face these types of systems, should they decide that or not have all the information available, any person that lives through violence must must make informed decisions, because sometimes they can't do that because there are loopholes and there's voids of information. And the first thing when you have to go through the justice process is to have information. And if they decide to go through the process, we have networks in Instagram like YSM Mexico, and there we will um, announce the release of the platform that has been adapted for Mexico, which will happen in about 4 to 5 months. Down the line, we're working with victims, survivors, and lawyers to generate these materials that we believe are key, and we will announce how this platform works. Thank you. On Instagram.
Muchísimas gracias, Ale.
Thank you, Ale.
Solo un minuto.
You still have 1 minute, an extra minute. Nageli, the floor is yours. Thank you, Stefania. I'm going to show my presentation and share it. And just like Ali, I'm going to tell you that I'm so very thankful to share this screen time with such an exceptional group of people, and to express my gratitude to Mexico Valeo for this invitation. So, more than speaking about the initiative Spotlight, which was created by to eradicate feminicide. This is a worldwide scale effort, and it is relevant because it is one of the first elements of innovation. It is focused objective number 5 of the UN agenda, which is equality of gender, and this objective has a specific component in this new 2030 agenda, which is not only an objective in and of itself, but it is a transversal or cross-cutting axis for everything else, which is very relevant because there's always this temptation of only having it as a single objective, ending violence against women. But in this new platform that evolved after the objectives of the millennium, we created this as a cross-cutting element of every single objective and goal for the 2030 agenda. The Spotlight Initiative is an alliance between the European Union and the United Nations to eliminate or eradicate violence against women. We're working in 5 continents in parallel fashion, and every single one of them has a priority depending on the conditions of violence for the region. For instance, in Asia Pacific, it can be more focused in mutilation, genital mutilation, in human trafficking, in Latin America, and in feminicide. In the case of Latin America, these are the 5 countries that we're working with: Argentina, Salvador, Mexico, and Honduras. So we have also Ecuador, Guatemala had to leave because of certain reasons, but in the concrete case of Mexico, we decided to include Mexico, which, although is a country of medium development, due to the high levels of feminicide that had to be included. Within Mexico, we work specifically in 3 states and 5 municipalities. And jointly, we work with 6 different agencies from the United Nations, the UNIDES, UNICEF, and UN Odyssey. The next element of innovation that I believe was very important to mention due to what we're talking about is that although it is a global initiative that has a regional scope, at the same time it focus on municipalities and states. This happens because there are problems that when you zoom into the problem, things change. And then although it is a national dynamic in terms of feminicide and violence against women, and it can have certain characteristics, it completely changes if we zoom into the specific municipality, not only in terms of attention to the needs or the type of problem or the context, but also the capabilities of a government or the reaction time of organizations and society at large. All the elements that can compose violence against women, and they change, they shift. And this program has 6 pillars, the same around the world, and the objective is to generate a possibility, a benchmark, so that they can be a model of a piloting model that can be scaled up. So the Spotlight initiative in and of itself is in a box of innovation. We're looking into problems that are part of the feminist agenda that managed to be put into place by women and organizations, but how we can see each and every single one of these problems from different visions and how can we face them directly. So in a detailed fashion, the pillars I can share with you. First up, we have a judicial framework and public policies. Pillar number 2, institutional bolstering. Pillar number 3, prevention and change of social norms. Pillar number 4 is essential services, and pillar number 5 is data. So this is the hypothesis of Spotlight. In order to integrate all the problems, they can be more manageable or understandable compared to treating them separately, because what fails maybe in approach is not necessarily that the project is not correct, but that there are other elements that are contextual in nature that affect the results. So this is an innovative element, working with agencies in a joint manner and working with the pillars comparatively with the rest of the world, and finding ways that we can scale up the models. Functionally speaking, when it comes to legal framework, we have a few hypotheses of innovation. What we're wanting to try to find is to retake the agenda in terms of judicial frameworks that are normative and public for at a level, federal, state, and municipal levels, and specifically some essential mechanisms that are focused of defenders for the rights of women. The relevant aspect of it all is that we have found that several women's groups and from reference in the states that have participation with the municipalities, and we have involved the voices of the victims directly, mostly mothers and grandmothers, to identify not only the elements that have sentences, but other elements that could have been left on the wayside. So what we're trying to strive for is trying to find a reform that is not only focused on creating the actual a crime, which is feminicide, which has been done in Mexico and the rest of the country, but other elements that have been left on the wayside or that have created contradictions. And although we have the actual crime that could sound, could give a provide specific result, maybe the regulation in the penal code or any other bylaw is not consolidated, and then therefore they cannot make use of that right. And this is part of a work we are trying to achieve with this particular pillar. And pillar number two, institutional strengthening, where we're trying to recover is the voice of the victims. We know that we have to train the people from the public administration services and departments and entire and the three powers in with a gender perspective and how strategically they can tackle the problems and pragmatically tackle these problems and provide justice. So this is why we have created several hypotheses and worked with organizations, and the objective is to have an integral agenda that, although it can be changed, it can be improved upon, and close the gaps that we have in terms of training. And in the same way, in this pillar, where we're looking for is budgeting so that the institutions can have learning of what's strategic in nature, what is the most urgent in terms of budgetary needs, and establish the concern of increasing budget from institutions that have a relationship with violence against women.
Que es el pilar número 3, este pilar
The next pillar, that is the third one, touches on the change in social norms. And what we're working on here is directly in the community with the transformation of conditions. And we're going to carry out more prevention in our training and working with the media so that the media can change the storyline, the narrative, or join efforts urgently in light of denouncing disappearances or sexual abuse. And we're going to spotlight Spotlight published a series of cards addressing boys, girls, boys and men and young teens. There's a series of concerns regarding feminism because violence against women and girls is very urgent. And as you know, we are in the understanding that the priority, and in terms of impact of statistics, of law enforcement and judicial endeavors, it's also important, and I am running out of time, to make sure that the storyline is shared with the communities. And I will go faster, but the essential services in our fourth pillar, how is it that we can make sure that they are more interconnected? The fifth pillar is quality data, and for record keeping, we have a clear route, but we have worked in depth here with who are generating statistics and users of statistics as well to make sure we can figure out how to unravel those knots that still appear in data and systems. And regarding the sixth pillar, we've worked with movements of women, with reference groups in civil society to determine how we're going to take this to the national level and to listen to the solid work and make sure that it is resounding in our new spotlights. And then the last is in response to COVID. COVID was a variable that nobody expected this year. So the initiative has tried to become involved and to generate mechanisms for improvement. So what's important here is that we're trying to generate many hypotheses and parallel models that will allow us to propose things that will come out positive and help us in our work.
Muchísimas gracias, Nageli. A ver si ya en la
Thank you, Nageli. In the second round, you can tell us a little bit more. COVID is of the essence to discuss as well. America. Good evening, all. Amilcar. Greetings from Peru. I'm Amilcar Romero. I'm the chair of a group, CAWA, and I'll tell you a little bit about what we have done in the defense and promotion of women's rights within the organization, the feminist organization that works not just on human rights, but all rights as a whole. And we have a specific program and theme line on women. We began in Peru, and this began through a legal clinic that proffered attention to women who were victims of gender crime, and we provided guidance and defense, legal defense for them in national courts, if that were the case, and international courts, which if that was applicable by the Peruvian state. What we have done here has simply been to ensure, as one of the speakers before me, that the authorities that were dealing with this situation would complain that there was a lack of information, of data, to measure and quantify what specific elements played in favor or against gender violence according to the locality. Now, according to this, we have data mining engineers, economists, etc. This is an organization that groups together different specializations, a little bit like what Mexico Evalúa does. And what we did was determine if we could analyze this, and we began to map all of the information available either in Peru or locally, globally, or public and private sources. So what we did was develop an algorithm and software that allowed us to read the information. I'm not talking about just one or two sources, but multiple sources of thousands of data. And that based on the parameters, we were able to determine what elements specifically were in favor or against gender violence according to the location. We fine-tuned the tool and were able to identify patterns that took place in streets and in cities. And we had the potential here in the interim at our Center for working with women that were victims of gender violence. And within the center, what we did was to present the proposal to the Forum on Peace in Paris. It's carried out in November of every year in Paris. And I would show you who is participating on this occasion. On this occasion, we talked about our initiative to heads of state, as you can see here, with the president of Estonia, with President Macron, and with other international organizations, and with our counterparts directly, such as civil society agencies and organizations. We have human rights and the rights of women were our special themes, and we were able to develop this together. So this is one of the expos, and we saw the interest that there was on behalf of international agencies and from the state of Peru as well, that was somewhat reluctant at first with the ambassador of Peru here in France, but they came around, and this is what we were able to present at the Paris Forum. So what we have done is make this tool available to authorities, primarily to the Ministry of Women in Lima, in the central government, that has an observatory. In fact, they needed information, and with the data specifically, we were able to assist the authorities and the local government and regional governments as well were able to use this. The central government allocates funds for those who can participate, but without results, without knowing what to do. But they were able to fine-tune some of the practices that they were carrying out and guide the action of the government. So what I can say in this regard is that we intervened in two sides. One was legally, and the other through this tool, through orientation. This is what we have been doing, and the tool is here, and it is ongoing, in an ongoing manner, being perfected. And what we expect is to be able to export it to other countries, for example, through partnership with organizations such as Alejandra Padilla or Nageli Sanchez, and implement it in Mexico as well, but also in African countries where many of the African governments and the Rwanda government have an interest in implementing it. This is what we've been able to do so far, and through technology, this tool has proven that it can strengthen the rights of women at the state levels. Thank you so much. Without further ado, I give the floor to Michelle to come full circle with this first round of interventions. Michelle.
Tienes el mute.
C'est bon, vous entendez?
Yeah.
Hola, bonjour à toutes et à tous. Même s'il est très tard ici, puisqu'il est presque minuit ici à Paris, et qu'habituellement à cette heure-ci, je suis sur le point de m'endormir, je suis tellement enthousiaste et honorée de participer à ce panel et à ce forum international que je suis totalement réveillée. D'ailleurs, je ne vais pas dormir de la nuit, je pense. Alors, je souhaiterais tout d'abord remercier l'ambassade de France et en particulier Madame l'ambassadrice, enfin ex-ambassadrice de France au Mexique, Anne Griot et Juliette Billy et Vincent Guimard, qui travaillent maintenant en collaboration avec Lawyers for Women, L4W, depuis presque 2 ans, pour mettre en place des programmes concrets et innovants pour lutter contre les violences faites aux femmes au Mexique et évidemment en France, parce que l'idée c'est un partage de bonnes pratiques et d'essayer de travailler en coopération. Pardon de ne pas intervenir en espagnol. J'avais promis à notre ambassadrice de L4W à Mexico, le docteur Patricia González Rodriguez, que j'apprendrais l'espagnol. C'était il y a 1 an, ma promesse. Et puis là-dessus, il y a eu le confinement. Et je n'ai pas eu l'occasion de revenir au Mexique. Mais je promets que la prochaine fois, je parlerai l'espagnol. Mais la langue que l'on parle toutes et tous est une langue maternelle, universelle, qui est la langue de la défense des plus vulnérables. Et en l'occurrence, les plus vulnérables, ce sont les femmes victimes de violences. Alors, vous posiez une première question, Stéphania, qui était la prise en charge spécifique de la violence faite aux femmes et qui est nécessaire pour ne pas invisibiliser cette violence. Et en France, je ne sais pas si vous savez, mais le terme féminicide, qui est né, je crois, au Québécois, le terme féminicide n'existe pas en droit français. Il existe dans le langage courant. On parle maintenant depuis 1 an, c'est très très récent, 1 an ou 2 de féminicide, mais dans le droit pénal, dans le code pénal, dans le code civil, le terme féminicide n'existe pas, ce qui est dommage parce que ça ne permet pas de donner la dimension systémique de ce fléau et du fait que c'est une violence sexo-spécifique et comme toujours, si l'on ne prend pas en considération la particularité d'un fléau, alors on ne peut pas lutter de façon particulière et donc de façon efficace contre ce fléau qui a été longtemps l'angle mort des politiques publiques. L4W, rapidement, c'est une association assez jeune qui a 1 an et demi, de lutte contre les violences faites aux femmes en France et à l'international par le droit, est composée, et c'est un des, à mon avis, des axes innovants pour lutter contre les violences faites aux femmes, qui est en interprofessionnalité entre des avocats, des magistrats, des policiers, des professeurs de droit, et on travaille vraiment ensemble à chaque stade du parcours de la femme victime de violences, notamment avec les policiers. Vous avez eu dans un panel précédent Audrey Prindès qui vous a parlé de toute autre chose, qui est commandante de police et membre active de Lawyers for Women, et l'interprofessionnalité était très importante. Alors, l'objectif de ce forum et de ce panel, c'est donc l'innovation pour l'accès à la justice. Et je crois que d'ailleurs, on est dans une sous-partie qui est la simplification de la justice. Parce qu'on a toutes et tous fait le constat qu'en réalité, les femmes victimes de violences avaient peu accès à la justice. Soit parce que leur parcours est rendu trop difficile, notamment on les dissuade, on refuse de prendre les plaintes, on les dissuade, soit parce qu'elles-mêmes s'auto-censurent et sont découragées à l'avance d'aller porter plainte. Et puis, seule une coopération véritable, je vous l'ai dit, était nécessaire. Donc, si on veut avoir une véritable effectivité de lutte contre les violences faites aux femmes, on peut avoir les outils les plus innovants, le système législatif le plus perfectionné. Si les femmes n'ont pas accès à ces outils et accès à la justice, alors ça ne sert à rien. C'est pourquoi la justice doit aller vers ces femmes et non pas les femmes aller vers la justice. C'est le constat que nous, on a fait. Et pour ça, ce qui a été innovant, je vais vous parler de ce qui est innovant en France en général et de ce que, pour L4W, en France et au Mexique, nous avons travaillé pour innover cet accès à la justice. En France, Portail des violences sexuelles et sexistes, qui est un chat en ligne, anonyme, gratuit bien sûr, de la police, du ministère de l'Intérieur, où toute femme victime de violences sexo-spécifiques peut rentrer avec une possibilité en plus de masquer, en appuyant sur un bouton, de masquer et d'effacer l'historique Google de ce chat pour que, évidemment, si son mari est là et arrive au moment où elle est en train de chatter avec un policier, parce que l'interlocuteur est un policier, elle puisse le masquer. Et ça permet de créer un véritable lien entre cette femme et un policier qui est formé spécifiquement à la violence sexuelle et sexiste. Et aujourd'hui, L4W travaille en partenariat avec les policiers de ce portail pour les former et pour leur donner notamment un réseau d'avocats dans chaque département, dans chaque région, que ces femmes pourront ensuite appeler avec une permanence H24, 24 heures sur 24, avec le Conseil national des barreaux, qui est l'organisme représentatif des barreaux. Donc ce portail, ce chat des violences sexuelles et sexistes, c'est très important. Et puis au bout d'un moment, ça met la femme en confiance et ça peut l'amener enfin à passer la porte du commissariat, à aller porter plainte. Deuxième innovation extrêmement importante, c'est une innovation qui n'est pour le coup pas technique, mais qui est législative, c'est l'ordonnance de protection en France. En 6 jours, vous pouvez obtenir, non pas au pénal, mais au civil, l'expulsion d'un mari violent ou d'un concubin violent et l'organisation du droit de visite pour les enfants et de la garde des enfants. En 6 jours, c'est une innovation de 2010 qui a été renforcée en 2020. J'ai plus beaucoup de temps. Vous avez aussi quelque chose qui a été également créé pendant le confinement, mais qu'on peut pérenniser, qui a été les SMS, le SMS Stop Violence. Vous faites un numéro, pareil, anonyme, gratuit, pour signaler une violence. Et puis, Elfort de Veliou, nous travaillons sur les cliniques juridiques. Nous avons créé une clinique juridique avec l'UNAM, l'Université de Mexico et l'Université de Chihuahua, avec Madame Rodriguez, pour permettre à des informations de droit de ces femmes victimes de violences, avec une clinique juridique virtuelle à cause du Covid, mais que l'on pourrait pérenniser après le Covid. Et c'est une plateforme en ligne sur laquelle les étudiants en droit proposent une assistante juridique aux femmes en situation de violence, qui permet et de proposer un accompagnement et de former les futurs professionnels. J'arrête là, je suis trop bavarde. Vous voyez, je vous disais que c'est le milieu de la nuit, mais je suis complètement réveillée.
Muchísimas gracias, Michelle. Creo que, a ver, ya han
Michelle. I think that we have talked primarily about what the projects that are being implemented are. In the second round, I think that everybody has been able to share key crucial ideas about this violence, and secondly, how interventions can be carried out. And if we had to sum this up to a certain degree, those who are designing public policy and in their experience, what would be those three key messages that we should take into consideration? In my perspectives, this is not focused on putting victims at the center, and I'm talking specifically about cases of gender violence, but this applies for other crimes as well. And I'm thinking about the justice systems. We're constantly talking about the prosecutors and judges and those who are doing this work to take into account the gender perspective. But how do we put the victims at the heart of this? Because victims are just an element that is secondary, and the criminal system is not putting them at the heart of the needs for this broad discussion about what justice and reparation should be. I know that the topic is much broader than this, but I'm talking about the justice system particularly. Thank you. Now, Nageli.
Muchas gracias, Stefania.
Stefania. From the spotlight standpoint, which I represent, instead of just putting the victims at the center, I would like to delve into priorities. For example, to have many more legal services that are virtual and accessible, because COVID, at the end of the earlier participation, is not a 6-month thing, as we thought at the beginning of the pandemic, but it's something that is going to do this until such time, at least as the vaccination is universal and there are clearer outcomes. So it's important to think about innovative ideas based on technology, but in a professional way. So at least from the standpoint of Spotlight, what we are proposing is that it is necessary to expand the services available not just for denouncing or following up on the criminal processes, because many times many of the courts went into safe and healthy distancing and have not been able to facilitate the judicial criminal process. In the same manner, we think that it is essential that an element of innovation that truly is imperative, though not technological, is to generate more linkage between civil and criminal processes, because in terms of gender violence, very many of these cases have been based on a divorce. So there is a triple, I'm not sure, but with children, they saw the violence, they experienced the violence, and then on top of it, they have to live with the attacker or the murderer of
Entonces,
the mother.
la vinculación ahí es esencial.
So there,
Stephanie,
this
que
is
estamos
an
on time,
imperative
pero
to
sí.
bear in mind. I'll stop there to be on time. Amilcar. Regarding the questions, let me point out that an instrument that we have worked on and developed called artificial intelligence for prevention and handling gender violence. And so as what we have done is a type of software that analyzes the amount of data, allows us to identify patterns, localities, and where and what is happening and what might possibly happen. We need to identify where something might have occurred in gender violence and what the profile of the women who the possible victims are going to be are. And so we need to anticipate, we need to forestall where it's going to occur. And so at the local level with local governments, we identified the intervention required. And so fighting gender violence is not an abstract thing. We know that in Mexico and in Peru as well, there's a lot of gender violence, but we need to revert the situation. How to revert this in childhood? I think that this is very closely linked to school and education and teaching from a gender approach. Many countries in the region find this taboo, and this is the case in Peru. And they have to work on establishing education with a gender approach from elementary school, primary school, and this has to be done immediately. And I think that education is a very big element here. Lastly, I consider that the response, the answer to this phenomenon doesn't necessarily have to be only legal. In fact, that is the progress that we have made. The problem is so large and so multifaceted that we cannot just deal with it from a legal standpoint. That has always been the answer. And something else is that the new key here is for good. You can tech for good, that you can innovate technological tools for collective efforts to stop this situation. So that is my closing remark. Thank you so much. Michelle, 3 minutes.
Merci. C'est vrai que la période du confinement, c'est parti durer, nous a permis de faire marcher notre créativité et notre imagination pour lutter plus efficacement encore contre les violences faites aux femmes. Je vous le disais tout à l'heure, il y a des numéros qui ont été mis en place, des SMS gratuits. Il y a également des possibilités qui ont été mises en place d'aller dans les pharmacies pour les femmes lorsqu'elles allaient pendant le confinement à la pharmacie pour acheter un médicament. Elles pouvaient, avec un signe, un mot, un chiffre, qui était le chiffre du 114, elles pouvaient faire alerter les services de police par le pharmacien. Ça, ce sont des choses qu'il faut pérenniser, qui nous ont permis, de façon plus éthique, philosophique, de comprendre que tout le monde était concerné par ce fléau. Mais évidemment, on peut aller plus loin dans l'innovation avec les applis, les applications dont on vous parlait. Je rejoins ce que disait Amilcar sur l'éducation. Évidemment, il faut aller plus loin. On a cet outil qui a été développé avec le confinement de cours en ligne, d'applications. On peut imaginer évidemment des moyens ludiques pour lutter contre les stéréotypes de genre, puisque bien évidemment, la violence faite aux femmes, elle prend sa source dans les stéréotypes de genre, et c'est la forme la plus grave, paroxystique de l'inégalité culturelle, notamment entre les hommes et les femmes. Et puis, il faut continuer les cliniques juridiques, et il faut continuer d'aller vers les femmes avec notamment ces permanences dont je parlais. Nous avons organisé avec L4W des permanences dans les hôpitaux maintenant, où il y a des avocats et des étudiants en droit et des élèves avocats qui sont à l'hôpital public. Lorsque les femmes viennent et qu'elles sont pour un court séjour aux urgences ou pour un plus long séjour, et qu'elles puissent préparer un dossier, avoir accès aux droits. C'est essentiel, l'accès aux droits. Il y a en effet les smartphones, il y a en effet les applis, mais il y a aussi les lieux, tout le parcours de cette femme, les lieux où elles sont, et notamment l'hôpital, le médecin, ce sont des lieux essentiels où la justice et le droit va vers ces femmes au lieu qu'elles aillent vers la justice et le droit. Voilà, j'ai terminé.
Muchísimas gracias.
Thank
Ya
you
casi
so
estamos
much.
llegando al final.
We are reaching the close of this first day, and we have a round of questions from the audience.
Preguntan cosas
And they ask things that are incredibly important, but you each have 2 minutes to answer, and this is the last panel session of the day. I have 2 questions that were posed for all of the members of the panel. One has to do with what happens with budget. How do you overcome the problem of budget when we know that one of the most common problems, particularly when we have so many authorities and instances and services, if we wanted to use the spotlight vision of comprehensive or integral attention for violence, then we're going to come up against the issue of budget. How does one deal with the little problem of budgets in countries such as ours? The second question, I think this is important, particularly for Nageli and Michelle, and intervention authorities, it's indicated that one of the strategies has to be training and professionalization of authorities. And how do we assess what is being done? What type of messages do we have for our training? And then at 10 years after, then there are still no results. There are some other questions for Alejandra, two specifically, and I have some in private. For example, for Alejandra, does the platform allow for support groups, information for victims and share experiences? And how can you guarantee that the platform reaches more women? I think this is important for all public policy. What is there to have an intervention if nobody knows about it? And for Nageli, the same. There were several specific questions regarding spotlight. For example, what are the main obstacles that you have faced by law enforcement agencies? So, Ale, go right ahead.
I know that for budget, that's not very related to what I brought to the table, but I would like to say that I don't know if anybody has an idea of how to to avoid that. And the only thing I can think of is pressuring the government. It's not that you're going to limit policies, but also that there is an impact in the working conditions for people, and we have to take into account that this also has an impact in public policies. It's not just per se the public policy that would be limited. There will be budgetary limitations, but with the actual things that this policy will execute. I believe that it is quite the challenge, and I don't see any other way in which we can get out of this, but to exert pressure to the government. So, and regarding training, I know that it is more focused into what Nageli and Michelle said, but I would like to point out that I am convinced that one of the many ways in which you can know that whether these trainings have worked or not, and you have to point it out. The studies that have been conducted in others countries have put out the information that training usually is not the answer, but they have to accompany the processes. And another way in which you can know is how you can attend to the needs of the people, and you have to directly monitor these processes from the point of view of the people that come to the institutions. Now, regarding the question as to how we think that information can come to us, I believe it is quite the challenge. We are contemplating two specific ways: the social networks. We know that we can't reach everybody through that, but also alliances with the baseline civil society organizations who attend to the needs of victims of the several types of violence. And from that benchmark, we can relay that information to the platform so that you can go from ear to ear. So the question related to the support groups, we are considering that the platform will have a blog that will relay information from stories for other women, which is something that survivors had talked touched upon. They would like to have this information. They would have liked to have this information or reading stories from other women, and it would have been a very important process in the for their healing. And we are also taking into account this information to rethink justice, and it is set to sharing experiences and even basic strategies as to how you can go with your process and generate relate information with other people.
Muchas gracias, Estefanía. Pues voy a tratar de ser súper rápida.
We're going to be, I'm going to try to be very fast. And when it comes to training, I believe that there are some indicators that can be as good for that, but and other processes that we can generate. But I will believe that the trainings, because they happen by themselves, they need to rethink the way institutions think of themselves. But it is important to continue to train people because we believe it is a process of continuous improvement that has to be permanently checked by the victims and the cases, and it doesn't necessarily have to be just irrelevant cases, but it has to happen continuously. And this is a process that we need to work on and find ways in which the victims can be more informed of their rights, not only in terms of the great right that we have as women of having a life with free of violence, but uh, like knowing exactly what types of rights you have when it comes to access to information to make it more effective throughout the entire process, not at the end of maybe a sentence or maybe knowing that there's coverage. No, no, no. The entire continuity of things and knowing that you have preemptive possibilities for everything. When it comes to protocols, though, they asked me on the how to homogenize these protocols. These are very difficult to do because it is important to have it clear that communication in Mexico, the crime of feminicide and sexual violence depend on the legislations of every state because they are federal. They're not federal. They're not felonies. They are considered state crimes. So at the same time, however, they are still crimes, so it's not as easy to get out of it, the woods, if you will. And so we have to insist on homogenizing the legislation and understanding that the protocols have to be based on the capabilities of the states themselves. But we believe that there's a way in which we can guarantee access to justice for the people. There's no problem to, there's no point in make me thinking of just the processes themselves. So the last question, because I don't have a lot of time left, is well, the keys again when it comes to the budget. We have to find ways to protect the baseline organizations. This is a fundamental organization. When I'm a victim, I cannot call, the bigwigs at an international and national level. I have to call whoever is close to me, which is usually baseline organizations. In the end, we have to protect the women. This is what we have to do. It is important to keep that in mind, to have a priority because the budget is limited. We do not have money for everything because this is a situation of crisis and there's a recession right now. So we have to protect somebody, and this is fundamental to have this in the mind. Because sometimes what happens is that the budgets are usually not geared towards the needs, and we have to help the victims directly with those budgets. Now, regarding the questions and everything that has to be but with the budgets, I can say that the organization has always sponsored the victims so that the budgets can have a focus on gender and in that we increase the budgets that are geared and aimed directly at legitimizing these types of problems and making sure that people are aware of them. This is something that the country has to tackle directly. And it is also about understanding that we need to empower the citizens. In the case of Peru, the citizens can participate in the elaboration of their local budgets. And when we tell them that they can do that, they do a better scrutiny as to what things need to be spent on or not, and they are more vigilant as to where the money goes. We have to understand that. And of course, when it comes to the budget, some countries have to pay more than this one. It no longer applies that well. Uh, this is maybe a budget that Germany has and we don't have it. No, I believe that Peru and Mexico and other countries need the exact same amount of money to face these things, and we should not delegate our responsibilities to third parties in the end. When it comes to training, I believe that training has to happen and be focused in the operation of justice. Mainly when we face this reality of complaints, and we understand that not a lot of people understand what's happening in the country, and sometimes even specific instances of the government have to want to absorb the entire responsibility, but we also sometimes actually have to delegate them these responsibilities to, so that certain aspects of justice can take a case from the very beginning. And even the police officers themselves, when you go to the police department and you lay your claim, you re-victimize the victim by not providing them proper access to justice. So there has to be an effort in terms of the budget, and the training from specialists like ourselves should happen as well.
Para
Thank you.
concluir.
Michelle?
Alors, sur la question des budgets, comment pallier au budget, même si en France, notre président de la République, Macron, a déclaré lorsqu'il a été élu que la lutte contre les violences faites aux femmes était la grande cause nationale de son quinquennat, et même si nous avons eu il y a un an un Grenelle des violences conjugales qui a été très efficace parce qu'on en a parlé, donc c'est sorti de l'angle mort, c'est très important. Il y a eu des moyens qui ont été alloués, il y a une loi, je vous en parlais, en 6 jours maintenant, on peut obtenir l'expulsion d'un conjoint violent, il y a eu des avancées, mais évidemment le budget de la justice notamment, qui inclut le budget de la pénitentiaire, donc quand on nous dit en France que le budget de la justice augmente, on sait que dedans il y a le budget des prisons, et donc ce n'est pas ce budget-là qui est alloué à la lutte contre les violences faites aux femmes. Et donc il faut bien évidemment pallier par des initiatives privées. Vous parliez du commissariat, c'est très important. Nous, à LFW, avec une clinique juridique parisienne, enfin, de la région parisienne, on a mis en place une cartographie de l'accueil des femmes victimes de violences conjugales dans les commissariats, avec un questionnaire remis à la sortie des commissariats. Il y a eu une initiative qui est la gouvernementale, où 60 commissariats en France sont maintenant équipés d'une assistante sociale et d'une psychologue, parce qu'on connaît la spécificité de ces femmes qui portent plainte, qui vont, qui repartent, qui abandonnent les plaintes, qui hésitent. Et donc, toutes les initiatives privées dont je vous parlais, notamment dans les sociétés privées, c'est très important. Nous, on met en place avec L4W des permanences juridiques, commence à avoir des collaborations avec des gros groupes privés, des entreprises qui, parce qu'on sait aujourd'hui, comme une entreprise est éco-responsable et que c'est un label et une vitrine d'être éco-responsable, de plus en plus, l'égalité homme-femme, c'est également une vitrine, et la lutte contre les violences faites aux femmes devient, pour beaucoup d'entreprises, quelque chose qui va avoir un impact économique positif. Et c'est là-dessus qu'il faut jouer, puisque en termes d'image, pour ces entreprises, pouvoir dire qu'elles ont mis en place un dispositif de lutte contre les violences faites aux femmes avec des partenariats, notamment des lawyers, c'est extrêmement valorisant. Et donc, nous, on peut l'utiliser dans la lutte qui nous occupe toutes et tous contre ce fléau. Je pense que c'est un des axes. Voilà, je crois que s'il y a une seule femme à qui on a pu libérer la parole, parce qu'en effet, on libère la parole, mais il faut libérer l'écoute. C'est bien de libérer la parole, mais il faut libérer nos oreilles après avoir libéré la bouche. Donc, s'il y a une seule femme, à chaque fois, chacun de nous formé, vous parlez de la formation, Estefania, évidemment, c'est très important, la formation. Il ne faut pas que la lutte contre les violences faites aux femmes soit laissée à des professionnels du droit qui seraient de seconde zone ou de seconde catégorie. C'est pour ça, nous, au barreau de Paris, au Conseil de l'ordre de Paris, nous avons mis en place des formations spécifiques qualifiantes qui permettent, même quand on est inscrit sur à l'aide juridictionnelle, à l'aide juridique, il faut avoir passé un examen et une série de formations de plusieurs heures et de plusieurs journées pour pouvoir prendre en charge les femmes victimes de violences. Je pense que ça, c'est très important. Et je crois que voilà, et ces initiatives-là, ce panel-là et ce forum-là ont fait avancer. Il faut penser grand, mais avancer petit. Je crois que c'est ce qu'on est en train de faire.
Muchísimas gracias, Michelle. Pues ha
Thank you,
llegado
Michelle. So we've reached
creo
the
que
end
todo
of our panel. I believe that all the work that you do can be found online. So any additional information that you would like, please check the projects. We still have 2 extra days of the forum. Go log into the social networks to see the program for the day. And without further ado, a good night to those of you who are in Europe. Good afternoon to those of us who are on this side of the world. And we'll see each other around tomorrow. Bye-bye.
Gracias.
Au revoir.
Au revoir.
Hello.
Rico en conceptos, discusiones y análisis este primer día. Espérense para el día de mañana. Mañana nos enfocaremos en el tema de modernizando la justicia y tenemos 6 paneles y 2 conferencias magistrales. Una probadita, innovaciones en prisiones, modernización de la gestión de la justicia enfocada a grupos en situación de vulnerabilidad, denuncia de corrupción y el papel de los denunciantes, innovaciones, justicia y seguridad. Vamos, un tema que puede parecer más enfocado en lo técnico de la justicia, de la procuración de justicia, pero que en realidad va a ser tan interesante o más que el día de hoy. Y no me queda más que agradecerles a todas y todos su presencia. Nos vemos mañana, ya lo saben, a partir de las 10. La charla del día de hoy quedó ya en nuestro canal de YouTube de México Evalúa, pueden buscarlo como México Evalúa. El programa del día de mañana y también el tercer día lo encuentran en mexicoevalua.org o bien en innovacionenlajusticia.mexicoevalua.org. Ahí encuentran todo, en realidad, y nos vemos mañana. Gracias por su presencia.